All right, so this is a review for the multiple choice portion of your AP County test, and this will be part one. All right, this first slide, these terms come from chapters 1 and 2. First of all, we looked at different perspectives or approaches, which are ways that we explain people's behavior. The first one you see here is psychodynamic or psychoanalysis. And according to Sigmund Freud, who came up with this perspective, we act the way we do because of unconscious thoughts, so thoughts we're unaware of, or we are looking at childhood experiences shaping our behavior. A technique that they use would be free association, which you should be very familiar with, where you say whatever comes to mind and the therapist analyzes you and tells you what's really going on unconsciously. The second approach or perspective that you see is behavioral, and this is a learning theory. Watson was the founder of behaviorism and believed that we shouldn't just look at mental processes, that we should look at behaviors or actions that we can observe. So here you're looking at observable responses. And Wilhelm Wundt, we learned from Unit 1, was the father of psychology. He was the first person to ever have a psych lab, and that was in Leipzig, Germany in 1879. And he and his assistant Titchener used a technique called introspection, where you record your own thoughts and feelings. The next four terms are from the second unit that we covered on research in psychology. So we have to conduct research in psychology because we have two flaws that are listed here in our thought process. First of all, we tend to be overconfident. So oftentimes we think we know more or we're better than we are. You know, you may think, okay, when I grow up, I'm definitely moving away to go to college and getting out of town. That's overconfidence because you may, when you graduate, end up staying home because it's very costly to move away. Hindsight bias. This is the fact that sometimes we think we knew the outcome of something, but we usually say that after we've heard the outcome. Like, oh, I know so and so was going to win that game, but you really don't say that until you heard actually who won the game. One type of research that is used in psychology is a case study, and that's an in-depth look at one person. So you can get a lot of information, or a single event. You can get a lot of information through interviewing, but sometimes that information that you get from that one group or one person may not apply to the general population. So that's a little downfall. When looking at surveys, one of the downfall can be wording effects. You know, people who create the survey can word things to influence the way you answer them. All right, these three terms come from the chapter on neuroscience. So first of all, the autonomic nervous system, that is the part of the nervous system that controls your automatic processes like heartbeat and breathing and perspiration. You have no control over that. It's automatic. And whenever we're in an emotional state or we're feeling scared, we're in danger, the autonomic nervous system automatically kicks in and your heart rate goes up, your breathing increases, and you start to perspire. The Broca's area, that is the part of the brain that controls the muscle movements in your mouth and allows you to speak. Neurotransmitters, they are your chemical messengers that allow neurons to communicate with one another by crossing the synapse. The second two terms are from the chapter on nature versus nurture. In this chapter, we looked at evolutionary psychology, and the principle behind evolutionary psychology is natural selection. So this would state that traits that allow you to survive and reproduce will be passed on and become dominant, and we will share them in common with everyone worldwide. The social learning theory would state that we learn our gender roles and how to act masculine and feminine from our caregivers and through observation of our caregivers, and also reward and punishment for appropriate gender behavior. So the terms on this slide, and there are quite a few, are from the developmental psych unit, or the lifespan. First of all, the reading reflex, that is when you brush a child's cheek in either direction, it will open its mouth and search for food. Face-like images, young children prefer face-like images as opposed to something that looks confusing to them. Jean Piaget is the leading developmental psychologist that looked at cognitive thought, specifically in children and how they think differently. Conservation or conservatism was a mental milestone that Piaget talked about, where a child around the age of 8 or 9 is able to recognize that if the form changes, the amount stays the same. So, for example, if a child is 6 and you cut up their grilled cheese, or you cut up their younger child's grilled cheese, a 2-year-old or 3-year-old, and theirs is all in one piece, they may think that the younger child has more because there's more pieces. Theory of mind. So theory of mind is being able to put yourself in someone else's place, understanding what other people think. Young children gain that ability usually by the time they go to kindergarten. If that persists well beyond 6, 7 years old, that could be a sign of autism. People with autism lack the ability to put themselves in other people's places and recognize what others are thinking. Kohlberg looked at moral reasoning. He had a theory of moral reasoning, and he believed that pre-conventional young children just follow rules and do what's right for selfish reasons. So that they don't get punished, or they maybe can gain a reward. During the conventional stage, during adolescence, we start to do what is right to fit in with others and society. Erik Erikson, we talked about his different stages of psychosocial development. The first stage we looked at was trust versus mistrust with an infant. So if a child is provided with all of their basic needs, they will learn trust, because young infants have to rely on others for everything that they need. The task during the adolescent years is to develop your identity. So to figure out what you want out of life, what you want to be, what are your goals and expectations. Okay, so the terms on this slide come from a sensation and perception. Only 3 of them. First of all, we have feature detectors in our occipital lobe, and this allows us to distinguish between distance and form and color all at the same time. Hubel and Wiesel are the one who discovered those. Transduction is converting some energy stimulus into a neural impulse, so that can be traveled up to the brain for translation. And Weber's law, that's the percentage that is needed or required before you can detect a change in any sensation. Also, absolute threshold. Absolute threshold is when you can first detect a difference, when you can first detect some stimulus. So if the volume is all the way down and I start turning it up and I say, when do you detect it? That would be your absolute threshold. So when we can detect something 50% of the time would be the definition. Okay, on this slide, we are looking at states of consciousness, and we talked about your 24 internal biological clock. So your period of being asleep and awake is referred to as your circadian rhythm. Stage 5 is also called REM sleep, when we are dreaming at night. So rapid eye movement. During this stage, we are dreaming and our mind is very active, but we are basically paralyzed. So this is referred to as paradoxical sleep. We looked at psychoactive drugs in this unit, and we talked about opiates, which release endorphins because opiates are your painkillers. We talked about hypnosis in this unit also, and if you recall, I pointed out that memories cannot be retrieved during hypnosis like it was once believed. Actually, the opposite can happen. Therapists can falsely implant memories during hypnosis. All right, this slide, we're looking at the chapter on learning. Generalization is the fact that during classical conditioning, sometimes if we are conditioned to have a certain behavior, we can respond to similar stimuli. And the example, like baby Albert, baby Albert just didn't fear the animals that were involved in his experimentation, but he feared everything with fur. So if you become afraid of speeding cars, you may also become afraid of a speeding truck. That'd be generalization. Conditioned response, that is a learned response. So in Pavlov's example, the bell was the conditioned or learned stimulus, and the dog salivated to the bell. That was the conditioned or learned response, not natural. Fixed interval is a reinforcement schedule where you are reinforced on a set amount of time passing. So that would be similar to a, let's say, a biweekly paycheck. So every 2 weeks you get paid.